Chapter 25. Now that I am writing these lines, I am restrained by that dread of appearing sentimental and ridiculous, in which I have been trained from childhood. When I want to be affectionate, or to say anything tender, I don't know how to be natural. And it is that dread, together with lack of practice, that prevents me from being able to express with perfect clearness what was passing in my soul at that time. I was not in love with Zinaida Fyodorovna, but in the ordinary human feeling I had for her. There was far more youth, freshness, and joyousness than in Orlov's love. As I worked in the morning, cleaning boots or sweeping the rooms, I waited with a thrill at my heart for the moment when I should hear her voice and her footsteps. To stand watching her as she drank her coffee in the morning or ate her lunch, to hold her fur coat for her in the hall, and to put the galoshes on her little feet while she rested her hand on my shoulder, then to wait till the hall porter rang up for me. To meet her at the door, cold and rosy, powdered with the snow. To listen to her brief exclamations about the frost or the cabman. If only you knew how much all that meant to me. I longed to be in love, to have a wife and child of my own. I wanted my future wife to have just such a face, such a voice. I dreamed of it at dinner and in the street when I was sent on some errand and when I lay awake at night. Orlov rejected with disgust children, cooking, copper saucepans, and feminine knickknacks. And I gathered them all up, tenderly cherished them, in my dreams loved them, and begged them of destiny. I had visions of a wife, a nursery, a little house with garden paths. I knew that if I did love her, I could never dare hope for the miracle of her returning my love. But that reflection did not worry me. In my quiet, modest feeling akin to ordinary affection, there was no jealousy of Orlov or even envy of him, since I realized that for a wreck like me, happiness was only to be found in dreams. When Zinaida Fyodorovna sat up night after night for her George, looking immovably at a book of which she never turned a page, or when she shuddered and turned pale at Polya's crossing the room, I suffered with her, and the idea occurred to me to lance this festering wound as quickly as possible by letting her know what was said here at supper on Thursdays. But how was it to be done? More and more often, I saw her tears. For the first weeks, she laughed and sang to herself, even when Olav was not at home. But by the second month, there was a mournful stillness in our flat, broken only on Thursday evenings. She flattered Orlov, and to wring from him a counterfeit smile or kiss, was ready to go on her knees to him, to fawn on him like a dog. Even when her heart was heaviest, she could not resist glancing into a looking-glass if she passed one, and straightening her hair. It seemed strange to me that she could still take an interest in clothes and go into ecstasies over her purchases. It did not seem in keeping with her genuine grief. She paid attention to the fashions and ordered expensive dresses. What for? On whose account? I particularly remember one dress which cost 400 rubles. To give 400 rubles for an unnecessary, useless dress, while women for their hard day's work get only 20 kopecks a day without food. And the makers of Venice and Brussels lace are only paid half a franc a day on the supposition that they can earn the rest by immorality. And it seemed strange to me that Zinaida Fyodorovna was not conscious of it. It vexed me. But she had only to go out of the house for me to find excuses and explanations for everything, and to be waiting eagerly for the hall porter to ring for me. She treated me as a flunky, a being of a lower order. One may pat a dog and yet not notice it. I was given orders and asked questions, but my presence was not observed. My master and mistress thought it unseemly to say more to me than is usually said to servants. If when waiting at dinner I had laughed or put in my word in the conversation, they would certainly have thought I was mad and have dismissed me. Zinaida Fyodorovna was favorably disposed to me, all the same. When she was sending me on some errand, or explaining to me the working of a new lamp, or anything of that sort, her face was extraordinarily kind, frank, and cordial. And her eyes looked me straight in the face. At such moments, I always fancied she remembered with gratitude how I used to bring her letters to Zaniensky Street. When she rang the bell, Polya, who considered me her favorite and hated me for it, used to say with a jeering smile, "Go along. Your mistress wants you." Zinaida Fyodorovna considered me as a being of a lower order and did not suspect that if anyone in the house were in a humiliating position, it was she. She did not know that I, a footman, was unhappy on her account, and used to ask myself 20 times a day what was in store for her and how it would all end. Things were growing visibly worse day by day. After the evening on which they had talked of his official work, Orlov, who could not endure tears, unmistakably began to avoid conversation with her whenever Zinaida Fyodorovna began to argue, or to beseech him, or seemed on the point of crying. He seized some plausible excuse for retreating to his study or going out. He more and more rarely slept at home, and still more rarely dined there. On Thursdays, he was the one to suggest some expedition to his friends. Zinaida Fyodorovna was still dreaming of having the cooking done at home, of moving to a new flat, of traveling abroad. But her dreams remained dreams. Dinner was sent in from the restaurant. Orlov asked her not to broach the question of moving until after they had come back from abroad, and apropos of their foreign tour, declared that they could not go till his hair had grown long, as one could not go trailing from hotel to hotel and serving the idea without long hair. To crown it all, in Orlov's absence, Kukushkin began calling at the flat in the evening. There was nothing exceptional in his behavior, but I could never forget the conversation in which he had offered to cut Orlov out. He was regaled with tea and red wine, and he used to titter and, anxious to say something pleasant, would declare that a free union was superior in every respect to legal marriage, and that all decent people ought really to come to Zinaida Fyodorovna and fall at her feet. Chapter 26. Christmas was spent drearily in vague anticipations of calamity. On New Year's Eve, Orlov unexpectedly announced at breakfast that he was being sent to assist a senator who was on a revising commission in a certain province. "I don't want to go, but I can't find an excuse to get off," he said with vexation. "I must go. There's nothing for..." Such news instantly made Zinaida Fyodorovna's eyes look red. "Is it for long?" she asked. "5 days or so." "I'm glad really, you won," she said, after a moment's thought. She said, "Why? It will be a change for you. You will fall in love with someone on the way and tell me about it afterwards." At every opportunity, she tried to make Orlov feel that she did not restrict his liberty in any way, and that he could do exactly as he liked. And this artless, transparent strategy deceived no one, and only unnecessarily reminded Orlov that he was not free. "I am going this evening," he said, and began reading the paper. Zinaida Fyodorovna wanted to see him off at the station, but he dissuaded her, saying that he was not going to America and not going to be away 5 years, but only 5 days, possibly less. The parting took place between 7 and 8. He put one arm round her and kissed her on the lips and on the forehead. "Be a good girl, and don't be depressed while I am away," he said in a warm, affectionate tone which touched even me. "God keep you." She looked greedily into his face to stamp his dear features in her memory. Then she put her arms gracefully around his neck and laid her head on his breast. "Forgive me our misunderstandings," she said in French. "Husband and wife cannot help quarreling if they love each other, and I love you madly. Don't forget me. Wire to me often and fully." Orlov kissed her once more, and, without saying a word, went out in confusion. When he heard the click of the lock as the door closed, he stood still in the middle of the staircase in hesitation and glanced upwards. It seemed to me that if a sound had reached him at that moment from above, he would have turned back. But all was quiet. He straightened his coat and went downstairs irresolutely. The sledges had been waiting a long while at the door. Orlov got into one, I got into the other with 2 portmanteaus. It was a hard frost, and there were fires smoking at the crossroads. The cold wind nipped my face and hands and took my breath away as we drove rapidly along. And closing my eyes, I thought what a splendid woman she was, how she loved him. Even useless rubbish is collected in the courtyards nowadays and used for some purpose. Even broken glass is considered a useful commodity. But something so precious, so rare, as the love of a refined, young, intelligent, and good woman is utterly thrown away and wasted. One of the early sociologists regarded every evil passion as a force which might, by judicious management, be turned to good. While among us, even a fine, noble passion springs up and dies away in impotence, turned to no account, misunderstood, or vulgarized. Why is it? The sled just stopped unexpectedly. I opened my eyes, and I saw that we had come to a standstill in Sergevsky Street, near a big house where Pekarsky lived. Orlov got out of the sledge and vanished into the entry. 5 minutes later, Pekarsky's footman came out, bareheaded and angry with the frost, shouted to me, "Are you deaf? Pay the cabman and go upstairs. You are wanted." And a complete loss, I went to the first story. I had been to Pekarsky's flat before. That is, I had stood in the hall and looked into the drawing room. And after the damp, gloomy street, it always struck me by the brilliance of its picture frames, its bronzes, and expensive furniture. Today, in the midst of this splendor, I saw Gruzin, Kukushkin, and after a minute, Orlov. "Look here, Stepan," he said, coming up to me. "I shall be staying here till Friday or Saturday. If any letters or telegrams come, you must bring them here every day. At home, of course you will say that I have gone, and send my greetings. Now, you can go." When I reached home, Zinaida Fyodorovna was lying on the sofa in the drawing room, eating a pear. There was only one candle burning in the candelabra. "Did you catch the train?" asked Zinaida Fyodorovna. "Yes, madam." "His Honor sends his greetings." I went into my room and I too lay down. I had nothing to do, and I did not want to read. I was not surprised, and I was not indignant. I only racked my brains to think why this deception was necessary. It's only boys, in their teens, who deceive their mistresses. How was it that a man who had thought and read so much could not imagine anything more sensible? I must confess, I had by no means a poor opinion of his intelligence. I believe if he had had to deceive his minister or any other influential person, he would have put a great deal of skill and energy into doing so. But to deceive a woman, the first idea that occurred to him was evidently good enough. If it succeeded, well and good. If it did not, there would be no harm done. He could tell some other lie just as quickly and simply with no mental effort. At midnight, when the people on the floor overhead were moving their chairs, and shouting hurrah to welcome the new year. Zinaida Fyodorovna rang for me from the room next to the study. When good from lying down so long, she was sitting at the table, writing something on a scrap of paper. I must send a telegram, she said with a smile. Go to the station as quick as you can and ask them to send it after him. Going out into the street, I read on the scrap of paper, May the new year bring new happiness. Make haste and telegraph. I miss you dreadfully. It seems an eternity. I am only sorry I can't send 1,000 kisses in my very heart by telegraph. Enjoy yourself, my darling. Zina. I sent the telegram, and next morning I gave her the receipt. Chapter 27. The worst of it was that Orlov had thoughtlessly let Polya too into the secret of his deception, telling her to bring his shirts to Servievsky Street. After that, she looked at Zinaida Fyodorovna with a malignant joy and hatred I could not understand, and was never tired of snorting with delight to herself, in her own room and in the hall. She's outstayed her welcome. It's time she took herself off, she would say with zest. She ought to realize that herself. She already divined by instinct that Zinaida Fyodorovna would not be with us much longer. And, not to let the chance slip, carried off everything she set her eyes on: smelling bottles, tortoise-shell hairpins, handkerchiefs, shoes. On the day after New Year's Day, Zinaida Fyodorovna summoned me to her room and told me in a low voice that she missed her black dress. And then she walked through all the rooms with a pale, frightened, and indignant face, talking to herself. It's too much. It's beyond everything. Why? It's unheard of insolence. At dinner she tried to help herself to soup, but could not. Her hands were trembling. Her lips were trembling too. She looked helplessly at the soup and at the little pies, waiting for the trembling to pass off. And suddenly, she could not resist looking at Polya. You can go, Polya, she said. Stepan is enough by himself. I'll stay. I don't mind, answered Polya. There's no need for you to stay. We go away altogether. Zinaida Fyodorovna went on, getting up in great agitation. You may look out for another place. You can go at once. I can't go away without the master's orders. He engaged me. It must be as he orders. You can take orders from me, too. I am mistress, said Zinaida Fyodorovna, and she flushed crimson. You may be the mistress, but only the master can dismiss me. It was he engaged me. You dare not stay here another minute, cried Zinaida Fyodorovna, and she struck the plate with her knife. You are a thief. Do you hear? Zinaida Fyodorovna flung her dinner napkin on the table. with a pitiful, suffering face, went quickly out of the room. Loudly sobbing and wailing something indistinct, Polya, too, went away. The soup and the grouse got cold. And for some reason, all the restaurant dainties on the table struck me as poor, thievish, like Polya. 2 pies on a plate had a particularly miserable and guilty air. "We shall be taken back to the restaurant today," they seemed to be saying, "and tomorrow we shall be put on the table again for some official or celebrated singer. She is a fine lady." Indeed, I heard uttered in Polly's room, "I could have been a lady like that long ago. But I have some self-respect. We'll see which of us will be the first to go." Zinaida Fyodorovna rang the bell. She was sitting in her room in the corner, looking as though she had been put in the corner as a punishment. "No telegram has come?" she asked. "No, madam." "Ask the porter. Perhaps there is a telegram." "And don't leave the house," she called after me. "I'm afraid to be left alone." After that, I have to run down almost every hour to ask the porter whether a telegram had come. I must own it was a dreadful time. To avoid seeing Polya, Zinaida Fyodorovna dined it and had tea in her own room. It was here that she slept too, on a short sofa like a half-moon, and she made her own bed. For the first days, I took the telegrams, but getting no answer, she lost her faith in me and began telegraphing herself. Looking at her, I, too, began impatiently hoping for a telegram. I hoped he would contrive some deception, but make arrangements. For instance, that a telegram should be sent to her from some station. If he were too much engrossed with cards or had been attracted by some other woman, I thought that both Gruzin and Kukushkin would remind him of us. But our expectations were vain. 5 times a day I would go in to Zinaida Fyodorovna, intending to tell her the truth. But her eyes looked piteous as a fawn's. Her shoulders seemed to droop. Her lips were moving, and I went away again without saying a word. Pity and sympathy seemed to rob me of all manliness. That's what my iconic man gone. Polya, as cheerful and well satisfied with herself as though nothing had happened, was tidying the master's study and the bedroom, rummaging in the cupboards, and making the crockery jingle. And when she passed Zinaida Fyodorovna's door, she hummed something and coughed. She was pleased that her mistress was hiding from her. In the evening, she would go out somewhere and rang at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and I had to open the door to her and listen to remarks about my cough. Immediately afterwards, I would hear another ring. I would run to the room next to the study, and Zinaida Fyodorovna, putting her head out at the door, would ask, "Who is it wrong?" Or she looked at my hands to see whether I had a telegram. When at last on Saturday the bell rang below, and she heard the familiar voice on the stairs, she was so delighted that she broke into sobs. She rushed to meet him, embraced him, kissed him on the breast and sleeves, said something one could not understand. The hall porter brought up the portmanteaus. Polly's cheerful voice was heard. It was as though someone had come home for the holidays. "Why didn't you wire?" asked Zinaida Fyodorovna, breathless with joy. "Why was it?" "I have been in misery. I don't know how I've lived through it." My God. It was very simple. I returned with the senator to Moscow the very first day, and didn't get your telegrams, said Orlov. After dinner, my love, I'll give you a full account of my doings. But now I must sleep and sleep. I am worn out with the journey. It was evident that he had not slept all night. He had probably been playing cards and drinking freely. Zinaida Fyodorovna put him to bed, and we all walked about on tiptoe all that day. The dinner went off quite satisfactorily, but when they went into the study and had coffee, the explanation began. Zinaida Fyodorovna began talking of something rapidly in a low voice. She spoke in French, and her words flowed like a stream. Then I heard a loud sigh from Orlov in his voice. My God, he said in French, have you really nothing fresher to tell me than this everlasting tale of your servant's misdeeds? But my dear, she robbed me and said insulting things to me. But why is it she doesn't rob me or say insulting things to me? Why is it? I never notice the maids, nor the porters, nor the footmen. My dear, you are simply capricious and refuse to know your own mind. I really begin to suspect that you must be in a certain condition. When I offered to let her go, you insisted on her remaining, and now you want me to turn her away. I can be obstinate, too, in such cases. You want her to go, but I want her to remain. That's the only way to cure you of your nerves. Oh, very well said, Zinaida Fyodorovna in alarm. Let us say no more about that. Let us put it off till tomorrow. Now, tell me about Moscow. What is going on in Moscow? Chapter 28. After lunch next day. It was the 7th of January. St. John the Baptist's Day, Orlov put on his black dress coat and his decoration to go to visit his father and congratulate him on his name day.
He had to go at 2 o'clock, and it was only 1:30 when he had finished dressing.
What was he to do for that half hour? He walked about the drawing room, declaiming some congratulatory verses, which he had recited as a child to his father and mother. Zinaida Fyodorovna, who was just going out to a dressmaker's, or to the shops, was sitting listening to him with a smile. I don't know how their conversation began, but when I took Orlov his gloves, he was standing before her with a capricious, beseeching face, saying, "For God's sake, in the name of everything that's holy, don't talk of things that everybody knows." What an unfortunate gift our intellectual, thoughtful ladies have for talking with enthusiasm and an air of profundity of things that every schoolboy is sick to death of. Ah, if only you would exclude from our conjugal program all these serious questions. How grateful I should be to you. We women may not dare, it seems, to have views of our own. I give you full liberty to be as liberal as you like, and quote from any authors you choose, but make me one concession. Don't hold forth in my presence on either of two subjects: the corruption of the upper classes and the evils of the marriage system. Do you understand me? At last. The upper class is always abused in contrast with the world of tradesmen, priests, workmen, and peasants, sidors, and Nikitas of all sorts. I detest both classes, but if I had honestly to choose between the two, I should without hesitation prefer the upper class. There would be no falsity or affectation about it, since all my tastes are in that direction. Our world is trivial and empty, but at any rate, we speak French decently, read something, and don't punch each other in the ribs, even in our most violent quarrels. While the Sidors and the Nikita and their worships in trade talk about being quite agreeable, in a jiffy, blast your eyes, and display the utmost license of pothouse manners and the most degrading superstition. The peasant and the tradesman feed you. Yes, but what of it? That's not only to my discredit, but to theirs too. They feed me and take off their caps to me. So it seems they have not the intelligence and honesty to do otherwise. I don't blame or praise anyone. I only mean that the upper class and the lower are as bad as one another. My feelings and my intelligence are opposed to both, but my tastes lie more in the direction of the former. Well, now for the evils of marriage, or lovely die, glancing at his watch. It's high time for you to understand that there are no evils in the system itself. What is the matter is that you don't know yourselves what you want for marriage. What is it you want? In legal and illegal cohabitation, in every sort of union and cohabitation, good or bad, the underlying reality is the same. You ladies live for that underlying reality alone. For you, it's everything. Your existence would have no meaning for you without it. You want nothing but that, and you get it. But since you've taken to reading novels, you are ashamed of it. You rush from pillar to post. You recklessly change your men. And to justify this turmoil, you have begun talking of the evils of marriage. So long as you can't and won't renounce what underlies it all, your chief foe, your devil, so long as you serve that slavishly, what use is there in discussing the matter seriously? Everything you may say to me will be falsity and affectation. I shall not believe you. I went to find out from the hall porter whether the sledge was at the door, and when I came back, I found it had become a quarrel. As sailors say, a squall had blown up. I see you want to shock me by your cynicism today, said Zinaida Fyodorovna, walking about the drawing room in great emotion. It revolts me to listen to you. I am pure before God and man, and have nothing to repent of. I left my husband and came to you, and am proud of it. I swear on my honor, I am proud of it. Well, that's all right then. If you are a decent, honest man, you too ought to be proud of what I did. It raises you and me above thousands of people who would like to do as we have done, but do not venture through cowardice or petty prudence. But you're not a decent man. You are afraid of freedom, and you mock the promptings of genuine feeling from fear that some ignoramus may suspect you of being sincere. You are afraid to show me to your friends. There's no greater infliction for you than to go about with me in the street. Isn't that true? Why haven't you introduced me to your father or your cousin all this time? Why is it? No, I am sick of it at last, cried Zinaida Fyodorovna, stamping. I demand what is mine. I write, you must present me to your father. If you want to know him, go and present yourself. He receives visitors every morning from 10 till past. How base you are, said Zinaida Fyodorovna, wringing her hands in despair. Even if you are not sincere and are not saying what you think, I might hate you for your cruelty. Oh, how base you are. We keep going, round and round, and never reach the real point. The real point is that you made a mistake, and you won't acknowledge it aloud. You imagine that I was a hero, and that I had some extraordinary ideals, and it has turned out that I am a most ordinary official, a card player, and have no partiality for ideas of any sort. I am a worthy representative of the rotten world from which you have run away, because you were revolted with its triviality and emptiness. Recognize it and be just. Don't be indignant with me, but with yourself, as it is your mistake and not mine. Yes, I admit I was mistaken. Well, that's all right then. We've reached that point at last, thank God. Now, here's something more, if you please. I can't rise to your level. I am too depraved. You can't descend to my level either, for you are too exalted. So there is only one thing left to do. What? Yadada Fyodorovna? Asked Crickery, holding her breath and turning suddenly as white as a sheet of paper. To call logic to our aid. Georgie, why are you torturing me? Zinaida Fyodorovna said suddenly in Russian in a breaking voice. What is it for? Think of my misery. Orlov, afraid of tears, went quickly into his study. And I don't know why, whether it was that he wished to cause her extra pain, or whether he remembered it was usually done in such cases, he locked the door after him. She cried out and ran after him with a rustle of her skirt. What does this mean? She cried, knocking at his door. What does this mean? She repeated in a shrill voice, breaking with indignation. So this is what you do. Then let me tell you, I hate you. I despise you. Everything is over between us now. I heard hysterical weeping mingled with laughter. Something small in the drawing room fell off the table and was broken. Orlov went out into the hall by another door, and looking round him nervously, he hurriedly put on his greatcoat and went out. Half an hour passed, an hour, and she was still weeping. I remembered that she had no father or mother, no relations, and here she was, living between a man who hated her in Polia, who robbed her, and how desolate her life seemed to me. I do not know why, but I went into the drawing room to her. Weak and helpless, looking with her lovely hair like an embodiment of tenderness and grace, she was in anguish as though she were ill. So was lying on a couch, hiding her face and quivering all over. Madam, shouldn't I fetch a doctor? I asked gently. No. There's no need. It's nothing, she said, and she looked at me with her tear-stained eyes. I have a little headache. Thank you. I went out, and in the evening she was writing letter after letter and sent me out first to Pekarsky, then to Gruzin, then to Kukushkin, and finally, anywhere I chose, if only I could find Orlov and give him the letter. Every time I came back with the letter, she scolded me, entreated me, thrust money into my hand, as though she were in a fever. And all the night she did not sleep, but sat in the drawing room, talking to herself. Orlov returned to dinner next day, and they were reconciled. The first Thursday afterwards, Orlov complained to his friends of the intolerable life he led. He smoked a great deal and said with irritation, "It is no life at all. It's the rack." Tears, wailing, intellectual conversations, begging for forgiveness, again tears and wailing. And the long and the short of it is that I have no flat of my own now. I am wretched, and I make her wretched. Surely, I haven't to live another month or two like this. How can I? But yet, I may have to. Why don't you speak then? Said Pekarsky. I've tried, but I can't. One can boldly tell the truth, whatever it may be, to an independent, rational man. But in this case, one has to do with a creature who has no will, no strength of character, and no logic. I cannot endure terrors, they disarm me. When she cries, I am ready to swear eternal love and cry myself. And Pekarsky did not understand. He scratched his broad forehead in perplexity and said, "You really had better take another flat for her. It's so simple. She wants me, not the flat." But what's the good of talking? Sighed Orlov. I only hear endless conversations, but no way out of my position. It certainly is a case of being guilty without guilt. I don't claim to be a mushroom, but it seems I've got to go into the basket. The last thing I've ever set out to be is a hero. I never could endure Turgenev's novels. And now all of a sudden, as though to spite me, of heroism forced upon me. I assure her on my honor that I'm not a hero at all. I adduce irrefutable proofs of the same, but she doesn't believe me. Why doesn't she believe me? I suppose I really must have something of the appearance of a hero. You go off on a tour of inspection in the provinces, said Kukushkin, laughing. Yes, that's the only thing left for me. A week after this conversation, Orlov announced that he was again ordered to attend the senator. And the same evening he went off with his portmanteaus to Pekarsky. Chapter 29. An old man of 60, in a long fur coat reaching to the ground, and a beaver cap, was standing at the door. "Is Georgy Ivanitch at home?" he asked. At first, I thought it was one of the moneylenders, Gruzins, creditors, who sometimes used to come to Orlov for small payments on account. But when he came into the hall and flung open his coat, I saw the thick brows and the characteristically compressed lips, which I knew so well from the photographs, and 2 rows of stars on the uniform. I recognized him. It was Orlov's father, the distinguished statesman. I answered that Georgy Ivanitch was not at home. The old man pursed up his lips tightly and looked into space, reflecting, showing me his dried up, toothless profile. "Leave a note," he said. "Show me in." He left his goloshes in the hall, and without taking off his long, heavy fur coat, went into the study. There he sat down before the table, and before taking up the pen. For 3 minutes, he pondered, shading his eyes with his hand, as though from the sun, exactly as his son did when he was out of humor. His face was sad, thoughtful, with that look of resignation which I have only seen on the faces of the old and religious. I stood behind him, gazed at his bald head, and at the hollow at the nape of his neck. And it was clear as daylight to me that this weak old man was now in my power. There was not a soul in the flat, except my enemy and me. I had only to use a little physical violence, then snatch his watch to disguise the object of the crime, and to get off by the back way. And I I should have gained infinitely more than I could have imagined possible when I took up the part of a footman. I thought that I could hardly get a better opportunity. But instead of acting, I looked quite unconcernedly, first at his bald patch, and then at his fur, and calmly meditated on this man's relation to his only son, and on the fact that people spoiled by power and wealth probably don't want to die. Have you been long in my son's service? He asked, writing a large hand on the paper. 3 months, Your High Excellency. He finished the letter. I still had time. I urged myself on and clenched my fists, trying to wring out of my soul some trace of my former hatred. I recalled what a passionate, implacable, obstinate hate I had felt for him only a little while before. But it's difficult to strike a match against a crumbling stone. The sad old face and the cold glitter of his stars roused in me nothing but petty, cheap, unnecessary thoughts of the transitoriness of everything earthly, of the nearness of death. Good day, brother, said the old man. He put on his cap and went out. There could be no doubt about it. I had undergone a change. I had become different. To convince myself, I began to recall the past, but at once I felt uneasy, as though I had accidentally peeped into a dark, damp corner. I remembered my comrades and friends, and my first thought was how I should blush in confusion if ever I met any of them. What was I now? What had I to think of and to do? Where was I to go? What was I living for? I could make nothing of it. I only knew one thing, that I must make haste to pack my things and be off. Before the old man's visit, my position as a flunky had a meaning. Now it was absurd. Tears dropped into my open portmanteau. I felt insufferably sad, but how I longed to live. I was ready to embrace and include in my short life every possibility open to man. I wanted to speak, to read, and to hammer in some big factory, and to stand on watch and to plow. I yearned for the Nevsky Prospect, for the sea and the fields, for every place to which my imagination traveled. When Zinaida Fyodorovna came in, I rushed to open the door for her, and with peculiar tenderness took off her fur coat. The last time, we had 2 other visitors that day, besides the old man. In the evening, when it was quite dark, Gruzin came to fetch some papers for Orlov. He opened the table drawer, took the necessary papers, and rolling them up, told me to put them in the hall beside his cap while he went in to see Zinaida Fyodorovna. She was lying on the sofa in the drawing room, with her arms behind her head. 5 or 6 days had already passed since Orloff went on his tour of inspection, and no one knew when he would be back. But this time, she did not send telegrams, and did not expect them. She did not seem to notice the presence of Polya, who was still living with us. So be it then, was what I read on her passionless and very pale face. Like Orlov, she wanted to be unhappy out of obstinacy. Despite herself and everything in the world, she lay for days together on the sofa, desiring and expecting nothing but evil for herself. Probably she was picturing to herself Orlov's return and the inevitable quarrels with him, then his growing indifference to her, his infidelities, then how they would separate. And perhaps these agonizing thoughts gave her satisfaction. But what would she have said if she found out the actual truth? "Oh, I love you, godmother," said Gruzin, greeting her and kissing her hand. You are so kind. And so dear George has gone away. He lied. He has gone away. The rascal. He sat down with a sigh and tenderly stroked her hand. Let me spend an hour with you, my dear, he said. I don't want to go home, and it's too early to go to the Vershovs. The Bishovs are keeping their Katya's birthday today. She is a nice child. I brought him a glass of tea and a decanter of brandy. He slowly and with obvious reluctance drank the tea and, returning the glass to me, asked timidly, "Can you give him something to eat, my friend? I have had no dinner." We had nothing in the flat. I went to the restaurant and brought him the ordinary ruble dinner. To your health, my dear, he said to Zinaida Fyodorovna, and he tossed off a glass of vodka. My little girl, your godchild, sends you her love. Poor child. She's rickety. Children, he sighed. Whatever you may say, godmother, it is nice to be a father. Dear George can't understand that feeling. He drank some more. Pale and lean, with his dinner napkin over his chest like a little pinafore, he ate greedily and raising his eyebrows, kept looking guiltily like a little boy, first at Zinaida Fyodorovna and then at me. It seemed as though he would have begun crying if I had not given him the grouse or the jelly. When he had satisfied his hunger, he grew more lively. He grew identified. New victors would be fucking with. And began laughingly telling some story about the Bershov household. But perceiving that it was tiresome and that Zinaida Fyodorovna was not laughing, he ceased. and there was a sudden feeling of dreariness. After he had finished his dinner, they sat in the drawing room by the light of a single lamp and did not speak. It was painful to him to lie to her, and she wanted to ask him something, but could not make up her mind to. So, past half an hour, Horzan glanced at his watch. I suppose it's time for me to go. No. Stay a little. We must have a talk. Again, they were silent. He sat down to the piano, struck one chord, then began playing, and sang softly. What does that coming day bring me? But as usual, he got up suddenly and tossed his head. Play something. Zinaida Fyodorovna asked him. What shall I play? He asked, shrugging his shoulders. I have forgotten everything. Given it up long ago. Looking at the ceiling as though trying to remember, he played two pieces of Tchaikovsky with exquisite expression, with such warmth, such insight. His face was just as usual, neither stupid nor intelligent. And it seemed to me a perfect marvel that a man whom I was accustomed to see, in the midst of the most degrading, in pure surroundings, was capable of such purity, of rising to a feeling so lofty, so far beyond my reach. Zinaida Fyodorovna's face glowed, and she walked about the drawing room in emotion. Wait a bit, godmother. If I can remember it, I will play you something, he said. I heard it played on the violoncello. Beginning timidly and picking out the notes, and then gathering confidence, he played Saint-Saëns' Swan Song. He played it through, and then played it a second time. It's nice, isn't it? He said, moved by the music. Zinaida Fyodorovna stood beside him and asked, tell me, honestly, as a friend, what do you think about me? What am I to say? He said, raising his eyebrows, I love you and think nothing but good of you. But if you wish that I should speak generally about the question that interests you, he went on, rubbing his sleeve near the elbow and frowning. Then, my dear, you know, to follow freely the promptings of the heart does not always give good people happiness. To feel free, and at the same time to be happy, it seems to me, one must not conceal from oneself that life is coarse, cruel, and merciless in its conservatism. And one must retaliate with what it deserves, that is, be as coarse and as merciless in one's striving for freedom. That's what I think. That's beyond me, said Zinaida Fyodorovna with a mournful smile. I am exhausted already. I am so exhausted that I wouldn't stir a finger for my own salvation. Go into a nunnery. He said this in jest, but after he had said it, tears glistened in Zinaida Fyodorovna's eyes and then in his. While he said, we've been sitting and sitting. And now we must go. Goodbye, dear godmother. God, while he kissed both her hands and stroking them tenderly, said that he should certainly come to see her again in a day or two. In the hall, as he was putting on his overcoat, it was so like a child's pelisse. He fumbled long in his pockets to find a tip for me, but found nothing there. "Goodbye, my dear fellow," he said sadly, and went away. I shall never forget the feeling that this man left behind him. Zinaida Fyodorovna still walked about the room in her excitement. That she was walking about and not still lying down was so much to the good. I wanted to take advantage of this mood to speak to her openly, and then to go away. But I had hardly seen Gruzin out when I heard a ring. It was Kukushkin. Is Georgy Ivanitch at home? And we said, has he come back? You say no? What a pity. In that case, I'll go in and kiss your mistress's hand. And so away. Zinaida Fyodorovna, may I come in? He cried. I want to kiss her hand. Excuse my being so late. He was not long in the drawing room, not more than 10 minutes. But I felt as though he were staying a long while and would never go away. I bit my lips from indignation and annoyance, and already hated Zinaida Fyodorovna. Why does she not turn him out? I thought indignantly, though it was evident that she was bored by his company. When I held his fur coat for him, he asked me, as a mark of special goodwill, how I managed to get on without a wife. But I don't suppose you waste your time, he said, laughingly. I've no doubt Polya and you are as thick as thieves. You rascal. In spite of my experience of life, I knew very little of mankind at that time. And it is very likely that I often exaggerated what was of little consequence and failed to observe what was important. It seemed to me it was not without motive that Kukushkin tittered and flattered me. Could it be that he was hoping that I, like a flunky, would gossip in other kitchens and servants' quarters of his, coming to see us in the evenings, when Orlov was away, and staying with Zinaida Fyodorovna till late at night? And when my tittle-tattle came to the ears of his acquaintance, he would drop his eyes in confusion and shake his little finger. And would not he, I thought, looking at his little honeyed face, this very evening at cards pretend and perhaps declare that he had already won? Zinaida Fyodorovna from Orlov, that hatred which failed me at midday when the old father had come, took possession of me now. Kukushkin leant away at last, and as I listened to the shuffle of his leather galoshes, I felt greatly tempted to fling after him, as a parting shot, some coarse word of abuse, but I restrained myself. And when the steps had died away on the stairs, I went back to the hall and, hardly conscious of what I was doing, took up the roll of papers that Gruzan had left behind and ran headlong downstairs. Without cap or overcoat, I ran down into the street. It was not cold, but big flakes of snow were falling, and it was windy. Your Excellency, I cried, catching up Kukushkin. Your Excellency. He stopped under a lamppost and looked around with surprise. Your Excellency. I said, breathless. Your Excellency. And not able to think of anything to say, I hit him 2 or 3 times on the face with the roll of paper. Completely at a loss and hardly wondering, I had so completely taken him by surprise. He leaned his back against the lamppost and put up his hands to protect his face. At that moment, an army doctor passed and saw how I was beating the man, but he merely looked at us in astonishment and went on. I felt ashamed, and I ran back to the house. Chapter 30. With my head wet from the snow and gasping for breath, I ran to my room and immediately flung off my swallowtails, put on a reefer jacket and an overcoat, and carried my portmanteau out into the passage. I must get away. But before going, I hurriedly sat down and began writing to Orlov. I leave you my false passport.
Write again.
I beg you to keep it as a memento. Your false man, you Petersburg official, to steal into another man's house under a false name, to watch under the mask of a flunky this person's intimate life, to hear everything, to see everything in order, later on, unasked, to accuse a man of lying. All this, you will say, is on a level with theft. Yes, but I care nothing for fine feelings now. I have endured dozens of your dinners and suppers when you said and did what you liked. And I had to hear, to look on, and be silent. I don't want to make you a present of my silence. Besides, if there's not a living soul at hand who dares to tell you the truth without flattery, let your flunky Stepan wash your magnificent countenance for you. I did not recognize this beginning, but I did not care to alter it. Besides, what did it matter? The big windows with their dark curtains, the bed, the crumpled dress coat on the floor, and my wet footprints looked gloomy and forbidding. And there was a peculiar stillness, possibly because I had run out into the street without my cap and galoshes. I was in a high fever. My face burned, my legs ached, my heavy head drooped over the table. And there was that kind of division in my thought when every idea in the brain seemed dogged by its shadow. I am ill, weak, morally cast down. I went on. I cannot write to you as I should like to. From the first moment, I desired to insult and humiliate you. But now, I do not feel that I have the right to do so. You and I have both fallen, and neither of us will ever rise up again. And even if my letter were eloquent, terrible, and passionate, it would still seem like beating on the lid of a coffin. However, one knocks upon it. One will not wake up the dead. No efforts could warm your accursed cold blood, and you know that better than I do. Why write? But my mind and heart are burning, and I go on writing. For some reason, I am moved as though this letter still might save you and me. I am so feverish that my thoughts are disconnected, and my pen scratches the paper without meaning. But the question I want to put to you stands, therefore, me as clear as though in letters of flame. I want to accomplish ranges. Why I am prematurely weak and fallen is not hard to explain. Like Samson of old, I have taken the gates of Gaza on my shoulders to carry them to the top of the mountain. And only when I was exhausted, when youth and health were quenched in me forever, I noticed that that burden was not for my shoulders, and that I had deceived myself. I have been, moreover, in cruel and continual pain. I have endured cold, hunger, illness, and loss in liberty. Personal happiness, I know and have known nothing. I have no home. My memories are bitter, and my conscience is often in dread of them. But why have you fallen, you? What fatal diabolical causes hindered your life from blossoming into full flower? Why, almost before beginning life, were you in such haste to cast off the image and likeness of God, and to become a cowardly beast who backs and scares others because he is afraid himself? You are afraid of life, as afraid of it as an Oriental who sits all day on a cushion smoking his hookah. Yes, you read a great deal, and a European coat fits you well. But yet with what tender, purely Oriental, Pasha-like care, you protect yourself from hunger, cold, physical effort, from pain and uneasiness. How early your soul has taken to its dressing gown. What a cowardly part you have played towards real life and nature, with which every healthy and normal man struggles. How soft, how snug, how warm, how comfortable, and how bored you are. Yes, it is deathly boredom, unrelieved by one ray of light, as in solitary confinement. But you try to hide from that enemy too. You play cards 8 hours out of 24. And your irony? Oh, but how well I understand it. Free, bold, living thought is searching and dominating. For an indolent, sluggish mind, it is intolerable. But it may not disturb your peace, like thousands of your contemporaries. You made haste in youth to put it under bar and bolt. Your ironical attitude to life, or whatever you like to call it, is your armor and your thought fettered and frightened. Dare not leap over the fence you have put round it. And when you jeer at ideas which you pretend to know all about, you are like the deserter, fleeing from the field of battle, and to stifle his shame, sneering at war and at valor. Cynicism stifles pain. In some novel of Dostoevsky's, I opened lying again. An old man tramples underfoot the portrait of his dearly loved daughter, because he had been unjust to her. And you vent your foul and vulgar jeers upon the ideas of goodness and truth, because you have not the strength to follow them. You are frightened of every honest and truthful hint at your death, and you purposely surround yourself with people who do nothing but flatter your weaknesses. And you may well dread the sight of tears. By the way, your attitude to win, shamelessness, has been handed down to us in our flesh and blood, and we are trained to shamelessness. But that is what we are meant for, to subdue the beast in us. When you reached manhood, and all ideas became known to you, you could not have failed to see the truth, you knew it. But you did not follow it. You were afraid of it. And to deceive your conscience, you began loudly assuring yourself that it was not you, but woman, that was to blame. That she was as degraded as your attitude to her. Your cold, scabrous anecdotes, your coarse laughter, all your innumerable theories concerning the underlying reality of marriage, and the definite demands made upon it, concerning the 10 sous de French workman, pays his woman, your everlasting attacks on female logic, lying, weakness, and so on, doesn't it? All look like a desire at all costs to force women down into the mud that she may be on the same level as your attitude to her. You are a weak, unhappy, unpleasant person. Zinaida Fyodorovna began playing the piano in the drawing room, trying to recall the Song of Saint Senses that Gruzan had played. I went and lay on my bed, but remembering that it was time for me to go, I got up with an effort, and then with a heavy burning head, went to the table again. But this is the question. I went on. Why are we worn out? Why are we, at first so passionate, so bold, so noble, and so full of faith, complete bankrupts at 30 or 35? Why does one, wasting consumption, another put a bullet through his brains? A third seeks forgetfulness in vodka and cards, while the fourth tries to stifle his fear in misery by cynically trampling underfoot the pure image of his fair youth. Why is it that, having once fallen, we do not try to rise up again, and losing one thing, do not seek something else? Why is it? The thief hanging on the cross could bring back the joy of life and the courage of confident hope, though perhaps he had not more than an hour to live. Ye have long years before you, and I shall probably not die so soon as one might suppose. What if,
By a miracle, the present turned out to be a dream, a horrible nightmare?
we should wake up, renewed, pure, strong, proud of our righteousness? Sweet visions fire me, and I am almost breathless with emotion. I have a terrible longing to live. I long for our life to be holy, lofty, and majestic as the heavens above. Let us live. The sun doesn't rise twice a day, and life is not given us again. Clutch at what is left of your life and save it. I did not write another word. I had a multitude of thoughts in my mind, but I could not connect them and get them onto paper. Without finishing the letter, I signed it with my name and rank and went into the study. It was dark. I felt for the table and put the letter on it. I must have stumbled against the furniture in the dark and made a noise. Who was there? I heard an alarmed voice in the drawing room, and the clock on the table softly struck one at the moment